Welcome to Be Seen, Be Heard. Please tell me your name.
My name is Chris France.
Tell me about your childhood.
Well, it's interesting. I was born in Edinburgh, little town next to Edinburgh, Musselburgh. I was born in 1958. I'm 63 right now. It just so happened my mom and my birth dad were not married, and she had a bit of a struggle. But I lived in Edinburgh till I was 3, and then my dad, my birth father, Anthony, he never showed up anymore. What happened was he was in the Navy, the Royal Navy. He got restationed to Plymouth from Edinburgh. And so it left me and my mom alone. And of course my mom didn't have support enough to take care of me and give me a proper home. So she made a decision to place me in the Children's Society when I was 3 years old.
Chris, what's a Colorado cowboy doing living in Torbay?
That's very interesting. I moved to Torbay in January 2019. I'd previously been living in Santa Barbara, California. And the reason I came here, it just so happened that I had a business associate who lived here, Adam. And he knew a little bit about me. He knew that I was born in Scotland and I had a Scottish birth certificate. And then on Christmas Day 2018, he got on the government website and found out I was always a UK citizen and that I was eligible for a passport. And that's something I never knew. I thought I was an American citizen. In fact, in America, I served in the U.S. military. But so he finds out I'm a citizen. We apply for the passport. I get the passport and immediately book a flight on Norwegian Air. Give away all my possessions in California to my neighbors, pack a bag and a backpack, go to LAX and fly and land in Gatwick. And I was coming back home. I never thought I could in the past, but Adam gave me the opportunity and arranged it for me to come back here.
Would you like to tell me a little bit about yourself and your past?
Well, yeah, it's the reason I'm here in England is that being 3 years old and put in an orphanage when I was such a young child, I never knew the effect that had on me. Well, I didn't know about what was wrong with me until 2015. But the story was I was in the orphanage. My mom came back to the orphanage when I was 6. The Children's Society gave me back to her. And the reason they gave me back to her is she was married to a new husband, an American, and he could provide a good home. So, of course, they gave me back to her. We spent maybe a month or so in a little tea house in Marlow, then making the arrangements to go to America. And then the next thing I know, we're on a plane, a big Pan Am jet plane flying to America. And the first place we lived in America was Pittsburgh. I was 6 years old. From there, we then moved to California and eventually ended up in Colorado, where I went to grade school, junior high, and high school. The interesting thing, though, is that when I was taken from the orphanage, I was taken from my home, and that's what it felt like to me. I was a pretty happy kid, and had a lot of friends. I think that we had 40 children in the orphanage, and I was the youngest one. And I was just taken away with, all of a sudden, one day I'm living there and I'm a happy camper. Next thing I know, I'm taken away. And I'm back in the hands of my mom. And even though she was my mother and she loved me and she did everything she could for me, there was something very seriously wrong with the situation. And I felt something different. And so at the age of 6, 7, 8 years old, I started taking on some behavior that eventually turned on me And some of those behaviors were I started to learn how to lie about how I was mainly feeling, the things that I was doing, the friends I was seeing. And it was just, things started to change. And it became more and more difficult as a child to be happy. And I kind of lost it, at about 10 years old, 11 years old. I remember being very, very unhappy. And yet my mother couldn't see it. My stepdad, he worked so much that he was never home to see this stuff, but my mom could not realize that there was something very wrong with her child. Well, at 11 years old, and I was in 5th grade in junior high school, I saw these kids going across at lunchtime across the street into a creek, and across the creek this little wooden bridge, and they all went down underneath there, and I knew these kids were up to something. So one day I snuck over there with them, and I go down there, and of course, yeah, they're passing around a joint of marijuana, and they got a little bottle of whiskey, and they're passing it around, and I'm sitting there, and they pass it to me, and these kids were taking the whiskey bottle and just tilting it up and doing little sips, right? Pass it on. Well, they handed the bottle to me, and I took that bottle of Jack Daniel's whiskey, and I tilted it up, and I took 3 big gulps. Gulp, gulp, gulp. And they all started laughing. And here, before this day, I was a lonely kid. I was depressed. I was sad. I was not happy. And then immediately, upon taking that drink, I became part of the crew. I had a whole new group of friends. I became one of the cool kids. One of the rebellious kids, one of the outcasts. And from that day on, drugs and alcohol became my priority, even at that early age. And in turn, by the time I was 13 years old, I had alcohol dependence, meaning very early, signs of alcoholism were already starting to appear, meaning alcohol dependence is that if I don't drink, something bad happens, like I get sick. I start to shake. I have detox symptoms. So I started to drink on a daily basis, even at the age of 13. I remember going up to the hotel that I lived next to, the Broadmoor Hotel in Colorado Springs, very high-end hotel, and they had a little shop with like a pharmacy and a fountain, and they had a little convenience store down there, but they had a wine rack, these big freezers full of wine bottles from all over the world, and I would wear these big fluffy coats, and I would just every time I was in there at about 4 o'clock in the afternoon, I would go in there and grab a bottle and put it under my thing and walk out. And I would do that every single day. So I'm a 13-year-old kid drinking a bottle a day, a bottle of wine a day, and nobody knew it. And there was just there were no consequences occurring, and I started spending more time away from my family. In fact, I wanted to be away from my house because when I went to my friends' homes, I saw something that I didn't see in my own home. I saw affectionate parents. I saw emotional bonding. I saw people having fun. But when I went to my own little house, there was none of that.
What was your lowest point during this period?
It took a while, and I had quite a number of low points. But the last lowest point I had, it was in 2009. It was January 9th. In fact, it's the day I took my last drink. The situation was I was in a little holding cell about 12 feet long and about 8 feet wide off the side of a felony courtroom, like a Crown Court. And I was being held there before my court appearance for a 5th drunk driving charge in Texas. And with that many drunk driving charges, they considered you to be habitual. And the possible outcome of a guilty charge for that offense would be 25 years in prison. And I knew that. And in this little 12-foot holding cell, I'd been struggling with this stuff for so long that I gave up in that holding cell, and I figured, you know what I'm going to do? I'm just going to go into the court. I'm going to plead guilty. I'm going to go to prison. And while I'm in prison, I'll try to find a way to kill myself. and then the problem will be fixed. And I remember that quite well, walking into that courtroom. I had the orange jumpsuit on, I had the shackles and the chains on my feet, and standing in front of that judge, I asked the judge, I said, "Judge, I'd like to waive my arraignment and just go ahead and plead guilty." And he stopped me right there. And then the next thing that happened was amazing, but the lowest point was in that 12 by 8 holding cell.
What would you say was the turning point in your life?
Well, that's the same day. So I'm standing in front of the judge. And I've got on this side the prosecuting attorney, on my other side the defense attorney. Behind me is a bailiff, a sheriff. And what had happened is when I asked the judge to plead guilty, he stopped me and he says, "We need to talk." He says, "I'm not going to talk to you, but the prosecutor and your defense attorney, they want to both talk to you." So they took me aside, and what they told me is that the judge was going to read some instructions to me and tell me some things, and that they had, just go up there and listen to what he has to say, and then make your decision on what you want to do. And so I did. Went back in front of the judge, and what he did is he said, and at that time my name was Chris Freeman. That was my American name. He said, "Mr. Freeman, I'm going to find you guilty of this offense. I'm going to sentence you to the full TDC term. However, in this case, I'm also going to give you 3 years, a modified sentence of 3 years." And when he said 3 years, I'm thinking 3 years in prison. But what he kept saying, he kept going, he said, "I'm going to give you 3 years probation." And he said, again, because this was the second time I'd been in front of that judge, and this would be the second time he's given me a felony probation. He says, "But this time, this 3 years that you got, you need to be living in a sober living home, a place that doesn't promote anything but sobriety." And so that's what I did. And standing in front of that judge, when he said those words, it was like a shock, because I had done zero, I'd done nothing to deserve any kind of grace and mercy. And it made no sense to me that this guy's giving me another break. I mean, how is that happening? So all that stuff I had in my past about the God problem I had, and the doubt that I had that things could ever change, changed in an instant. And all of a sudden, I'm given a whole new life again. And that was the day I call it the day of my transformation.
What kind of treatment or support did you receive for your problem?
The first time that I started to experience consequences was when I was 19 years old. Things started falling apart for me. And by this time, I had quite a large cocaine habit. I was doing up to 4 grams of cocaine a day. Of course, I was drinking, smoking marijuana, and doing anything else I could find, but I was surviving. And the drug dealer I had, I owed him some money, and he left a threatening letter in my parents' mailbox, and they found out, and they didn't know what to do, but they offered me 2 solutions, and one was to call the narcotics or talk to the narcotics detective from the Sunnyvale Police Department, and the other one was to talk to the naval recruiter for the United States Navy. Of course, my decision was the Navy. So I went into the Navy with a problem that was nobody knew about it but me. And I was able to get through boot camp, Made it to my first duty station, which was in Washington State. And in the military, my drinking was acceptable. In fact, we had beer machines inside our naval barracks. I think beers were like 50 cents a piece, but you could drink as much as you wanted if you were off duty. The Navy, I started to have some issues with some legal problems there. I had a drunk driving charge while I was in the Navy, and they did send me to an alcohol awareness class or an alcohol education type class, and I went in there, and it really did not seem to do much for me. I eventually got out of the Navy and ended up in Michigan, living in a town on Lake Michigan, Muskegon, Michigan. And there things got even worse. And I ended up being arrested a few times and then actually being forced into a treatment system, alcohol treatment, in an actual treatment center, which is where I went. That just started another process of me in and out of addiction and in and out of sobriety. And it lasted for about 40 years. I went to 7 different treatment centers. I lived in numerous places that, you were supposed to be clean and sober in. They called them sober living homes. And it was just a struggle. I would get in trouble. I would sober up. I would get involved with the recovery programs, the 12-step rooms. I would do what they asked and become actively involved, participate in it. But eventually I would use again and drink again. It would just make no sense to anybody around me. They'd see me doing well, and then all of a sudden I'd disappear, and then 3-4 days later I'm poking my head up out of the weeds, wondering what happened to me. And that kind of thing happened over and over and over and over. And it wasn't till the situation in the courtroom in 2009 that things changed. And I'm pretty glad that they did change.
Do you think and find that kind of treatment was effective?
No, I don't. Reason being is, in the 1950s and 60s, mainly during the Vietnam War, the United States Air Force was finding that they were having a lot of problems with their pilots and alcoholism. And so they asked a few medical associations, specifically they asked the Mayo Clinic and a few others, to develop a program that they could send their pilots that have alcohol problems to. But it had to only take 28 days. That's the time limit that they had. Because if they went to 29 days, the pilot would have to go back to flight training. He could stay out of the cockpit for 28 days and not have to go back to retrain. So this treatment model that they designed was based upon a 28-day time frame. And it just so happened that Alcoholics Anonymous was the treatment framework that they utilized, the 12 steps of the program of Alcoholics Anonymous. So they integrated this 12-step process into this treatment model that was an inpatient setting. They would take care of your medical needs. They might do a little bit of a psychological talk to you, but more specifically, they would just give you education on the 12 steps. Then after that treatment, 28 days was over, they would send you back home. They might give you some literature like an Alcoholics Anonymous Big Book. They'd give you a meeting schedule, and then they'd tell you, go to your meetings, get a sponsor, do the steps, blah, blah, blah. And that's about it. So that pattern would just repeat itself, because what was really happening to me, I was trying to fix the wrong problem. I thought my problem was drugs and alcohol abuse, when in fact my drug use and my alcohol use was a symptom of what my real problem was, which was my abandonment issues that I had when I was 3 years old and the adverse childhood experiences I experienced, which dramatically affected me. Which makes sense now because when I was 11 years old and I took that first hit off that joint and took that first sip of whiskey, it was like magic. It was like all of a sudden nirvana, and I was at peace. But yeah, the treatment system in America, unfortunately, the majority of it is 12-step based, and the 12-step model of recovery is effective for only a very few people. For the most part, if it was a business, treatment centers would not survive. For the fact is that most treatment centers today have a success rate of maybe 2 to 3, 4%. In general, there are some that are very, very good, but there are many that are just there to take your money, roll you through, get your insurance stuff, and see what happens. You know, and even some recovery centers have been known to almost promote relapse. They put you into situations where it's a good likelihood that you're going to use again. You know, there's a lot of things like sober home abuse and treatment abuse going on that people have had to deal with in the last few years. But I do have a bit of a problem with treatment centers because just because you have a problem with alcohol or you have a problem with drugs, and you might get into a legal issue and be forced to go to these 12-step meetings doesn't mean that you're an alcoholic or a drug addict. So they send all these people into these 12-step rooms that are designed around a Christian model of recovery and in hopes that they catch on to something, when in fact the majority of the people that are going are being forced to go. And when they hear some of the things that they talk about, they're not really going to agree with what they're saying. They're going to bristle. They call it, the words that they use in there is bristle with antagonism. It means they listen to these people who are telling them these great stories, and yet internally themselves they don't believe it. And that's the way it was in my case. I didn't believe this thing they talked about when it came down to this spiritual experience and this God event that was supposed to happen to you in your life that would change everything and it would fix everything. And I just didn't have that in me. Not until today in the courtroom. But, you know, that's why I struggled with addiction and alcoholism for 40 years. And today I don't consider myself in recovery, out of recovery. I don't consider myself a recovered person. I consider myself an addiction survivor. And I'm living life today as a happy camper. But yeah, I think the treatment industry needs to adjust itself to just a different way of looking at things, because instead of treating the addictions, we need to be treating the people.
What did work for you?
All right. This is what worked. I was given an opportunity to reset my entire life. And I was given an opportunity to do it in a way that I could take my past traumas and my past difficulties with addiction and kind of flip it over and help other people with their current addictions. It's like one of the concepts in the program of recovery of Alcoholics Anonymous is that by helping others, we help ourselves. So they teach us how to pass it on. Take the information and the learning that we have of the way the steps work, and we pass it on to the next new guy. And then he learns it, and when he gets 5, 6 months, a year sobriety, then he starts to pass it on, and then it just goes on and on. That's how Alcoholics Anonymous actually grew to the size that it grew. One alcoholic helping another. Now the problem with that is that, and Adam and I talk about this quite a lot, is that you know they send people to these rooms and to these groups, and these rooms are filled with sick people, meaning they all have a medical issue. They all have a psychological problem. of addiction or alcoholism. So you're taking sick people, putting them in a room of other sick people, hoping that they get better. And, you know, not taking into account what may have happened to them before they ever took a drink, like in my case. There was nobody in the 40 years I was in Alcoholics Anonymous that ever gave me any kind of solution or even asked me about what happened to me as a child. They didn't want to hear it. You know, he said, you know, get on with it, get over it, you know, and it's just like that, you don't get over those kind of things. You know, the only way I've gotten over this is to educate myself on what it really was, and to accept the fact that, yes, my mom did these things, but also understand that my mother did the best that she knew how, because she was also raised in a dysfunctional family. In her immediate family in Lockerbie, they had 12 children in the family, and 8 of them died from alcoholism. She was the only one that really didn't drink. Everyone else drank. But my mom, she had the same emotional and psychological attitudes that you would find in an alcoholic, only she didn't drink. I was like her drug. I was like her drink. You know, I was her obsession, and it affected, you know, most of my life until I realized what was really going on. But by that time, she died in 2009. I had 4 months sober at the time. And the last thing I told her, I says, "Mom, it's okay, you can go." Because she had been dying from a terminal illness for like three years. And she'd been on hospice twice. And she was suffering, and she held on just in hopes that I would get better. And the last thing I told her, I said, "Mom, I'm happy." I said, "You can just let go now." And that night was the night she died.
How are things now?
Today, as you might can tell by looking at me, I'm pretty happy today. You know, I still have some things, but compared to where I came from, this is the best life I've ever had. I live in a little studio flat. I've got a great friend who supports me in everything I do, the good, bad, and the ugly. I've got purpose in my life. I'm able to face the real world. You know, one thing I've done in the last 5 years is I've removed myself from the recovery box or the recovery bubble, this little protectionist society. You know, I used to spend all my day and all my night involved in the rooms of Alcoholics Anonymous and around the 12 steps and around recovery people. They were the only people I knew. I didn't know anybody in the real world. Here in England, I go out into the real world today, and I can manage. I have a good attitude. I think well of myself. I have a healthy self-esteem. But I also am very honest about some of the things that might not quite right be with me. So, you know, one of the things I did immediately when I got here is I registered with my doctor's office, and I went into the doctor and I told him everything that I felt was wrong. I talked about my mental health. So what did they do? They got me on some proper medication for my mental health issues. I told them about my physical issues that I have today. I have quite a serious medical problems called peripheral arterial disease. And what it is because of my drug addiction, I was when I used cocaine, I would use cocaine intravenously, and I was injecting quite a lot of it. And the chemicals in the cocaine would actually deteriorate the interior walls of my arteries and scar the artery walls. And then the plaque would coat it up, and it's actually happens a lot with diabetes and smokers, things like that. But what happens is the blood flow in my legs, the oxygen in my blood does not transfer into the outside of the arterial walls, into my muscles and my bones. So my legs are slowly going away. My walking is horrible. I can't walk up hills. But, you know, coming here and being able to get the help that I really needed and the support that I needed, being around some great people in my life today, and then being able to live in the real world without feeling like I'm some kind of monster like I used to be.
What do you do now?
Today? Well, today I'm quite involved with connections that I have. I've taken my experience in sober living and in recovery and in treatment and in active addiction itself, and being able to convert it into helping people. And the way I do that is I find people over in one area and I connect them to people over in another area and I bring them together. And then also I find some organizations out there that my friend Adam and I have been able to help. We've built websites for recovery organizations in Colorado, sober living organizations in across America. Adam is also working on quite a big software platform that we hope that might change the world. But what I do is today I actively participate in my life. I get up in the morning and I immediately have an attitude that today is a gift. You know, I know that there's many situations I never should have survived, but I did. And the only logical reason I can come up with is how I made it through all that is so that I survived, so I can tell my story to others that may still be suffering, so that they might hear a glimmer of hope in what my story has to say, and that they too might find what I have. You know, happiness is my requirement. I have to put a smile on my face every day. If I fail to do that, that's when I start falling back into my old way of thinking. And my old way of thinking was, it'll never change, it'll never get better, it'll always be this way. When in fact that was my addiction trying to survive. Today, I go about life, I don't think about using, I don't think about not using. I go to the clubs, listen to the bands down at the Parrot, and everyone around me is drinking, and it doesn't affect me at the least. In fact, it's fun. You know, I can have fun in my life today. There's no longer a struggle.
Thank you, Chris. Finally, what advice would you say to other people who are struggling or suffered with a similar
Right, and this is
position?
a very important question. The first thing that myself and some of my other friends we tell people is, number one, take a big deep breath and relax just for a moment, and just kind of quiet your mind for a second. And then once we've got you into that quiet moment in your mind, tell me, as a person, when was the last time you were happy? Because if you're having the problems that I have, you're not happy. There's something terribly wrong. And what we need to do is we need to go back and maybe take a look at that. Yeah, we can treat your drug addiction, don't use. We can treat your alcoholism, don't drink. That's what they tell us. But in fact, if that's all we do and we fail to look at the human, you know, the person that's inside that body, you treat that first, these other things may just go away on their own. As it does with many, many people. You know, the interesting thing about the people that come out of addiction and come out of alcoholic drinking is that a high percentage of them do it all on their own, which is incredible. You know, in America, only 13% of the people that need problems or need problems solved with legal issues and other things, only 13% of them go to treatment. The rest of them, they get help all on their own or through their churches or through their families. You know, there's only about a 13% of us that are actually the hardcore, down in the dirt, last gaspers like I was. And I'd tell them to make a connection to somebody like me that is not going to judge them based upon their current condition, not going to judge them on what they've done, but is going to be their friend, be there for them, be a connection 24/7 to them, that they're never, ever alone in this. They can always reach out. Because that's the worst feeling I ever had as a drug addict. I was in Houston, Texas. I'd just gone, it was my 48th birthday, and I went crazy again and ended up in a crack house. I was in the crack house for 10 days. And I was huddled up in a corner. I didn't have my phone. I'd given that to the drug dealer. I didn't have the car or the work van I had. I'd given that to the drug dealer. And nobody wanted to talk to me anymore. And there was about 8 or 9 other people in that house. And the drug dealer didn't want me in that house anymore because he knew I was becoming a problem. Yet there was nothing I could do, no one I could reach out to, no one I could call. It was just, I was stuck inside this insanity. And the loneliness I felt at that time was the worst feeling I've had in quite a long, that's probably one of the worst feelings I've ever had. And that is one thing that they say in the AA book. They say that alcoholics know loneliness such as few do. Because it's kind of I call it a soul sickness. It's not just a physical problem, you drink too much. There's something wrong with your soul. Now, I'm not a Christian-based type of person or a religious type of person, but I'm a very spiritual-based person. Today, I might have this body that's worn out, but inside my soul is whole again. It's a happy soul. And I tell people that there is a way out. And it can start right now. In fact, if I'm talking to them, it already started. If you're talking to me, I might be the very first person you've ever talked to that's giving you hope, that you can escape. I call it the monster's grip, this grip of addiction, because that's exactly what it is. I in fact call it a possession. Like we have demon possession. I call addiction a possession. It's very similar. But I would want to give them hope and just give them a big hug and let them know that they are not who they think they are. That's it.
What makes you smile?
Makes me smile is just having the ability to connect, to be part of life, to not be isolated and all alone, to be able to give answers to questions that have never been answered before. These folks out there, some of the folks that we know out here, they're that way for a reason. They didn't get up one day and says, "Oh, I'm going to go lay on the street for a couple hours and hope somebody drops a penny in my hat." Nobody does that that's not a decision anybody makes. They ended up that way for a reason. They're in that situation because they have no hope, no solution, no answer. The system ain't working, blah, 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 blah. And they've given up. And we as a society walk by them like they're not even there. It's like they're invisible. We don't see them.
Lovely, thank you.
How you bet?
Thank you. Brilliant.